To discuss it all, I'm joined in studio by our I24 News senior Middle East correspondent Ariel Osirian and Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former IDF International spokesperson and the senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us today.
Shalom.
Now, Jonathan, when it comes to this most recent ballistic missile barrage, if we can say that it was one missile fired earlier in the hour, there was 2 missiles fired. We're seeing fewer and fewer missiles being fired from Iran. Now, there's a few different reasons for this, but as far as what it means for Israel's strategic standpoint over the skies of Iran, this is pretty significant.
It's significant, but we should, I think, still be cautious in understanding or assessing why. It could be that the Iranians have made a strategic decision to try to scale down, and they're looking for diplomatic ways out of the very challenging military situation that they now find themselves in. Or it could be that they simply can't fire more missiles because the Israeli Air Force has been very successful at hunting and destroying launchers. In any case, I think what's important is still for Israelis to keep in mind how absolutely lethal these missiles are. There's absolutely no room for complacency when it comes to sounding alarms and running for shelters. That has to happen. And yes, the good thing is that now when the Iranians apparently are not able to or trying to saturate a certain area with lots of missiles fired at the same time, which was the reason that some of them snuck through and eventually exploded, that'll make the job a little bit easier for air defenses, and it'll make it possible for the air defenses to intercept those that are incoming towards populated areas and let the ones like we saw now land in more or less open area in the desert land and not waste an interceptor on them.
Okay, so it sounds Iran publicly, they won't come to the negotiating table unless Israel stops. But Jonathan, what could it take for Israel to stop? Right now, they have the ball rolling. They're continuing to take out all of these assets. Israel says they don't have plans of stopping anytime in the near future. So what would it take for Israel to, quote unquote, complete the mission?
Yeah, I don't think that Israel, launched such a significant operation and declared war on a sovereign state, on Iran, in order to end it after 4 days. You just don't do that. This is a major move. This is a historical event, and it's not going to end anytime soon. Definitely not while Iran has the capacity to enrich uranium and the ability in-house, in-country, to produce nuclear bombs. Now, the goals here, that's really where things get interesting, because the first and outspoken and official goals are to take care of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And I think it's widely understood and recognized as a menace to the region, an existential threat to Israel if it materializes, and something that the West would rather see not happen, Europe and the US. Where it becomes interesting is, where do we go from there? Will Israel stop once that is achieved, or will Israel try to set in motion a series of events that eventually unravels the Iranian regime? Now, depending on what we hear in Hebrew and in English and in Farsi, that's a different reality. And I think that it'll be interesting to follow whether Israel will actually limit itself only to the nuclear program, the Revolutionary Guard, the Quds Force, their missiles and their military infrastructure, or will we see more attacks like we saw yesterday when Israel decided to take out the Iranian national broadcaster. Now, for many journalists who have been covering this, and I've been watching this on CNN, Fox, and many other networks, they're actually calling them journalists, which I think is an affront to journalists. This was an executive branch of the Iranian regime designed to terrorize and intimidate Iranians. It's part of the tools that they have in order to instill fear and in order to terrorize and elicit false accusations against Iranian civilians, and of course the head of the propaganda arm of the Islamic regime. So that type of target may indicate that Israel is aiming into other directions as well.
This is the Israeli spirit. These are the Israeli people who, for another 5th night in a row, will likely be spending their nights meeting new friends, joining the community, and being together during this uncertainty. I want to come back here in studio, Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus. With your work, especially with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, you are always talking to the international media. But this little piece, I think, truly shows what is happening in Israel right now. Do you think that the international media is getting this right?
I think it's more an issue of wanting to get it right. There's no lack of information. There's no lack of access. CNN could have done that story, so could Fox, and so could the BBC. It's a matter of choosing, or ABC. It's a matter of choosing. It's a matter of wanting to portray Israel and Israelis in that light, or preferring to portray Israel and Israelis in a different light, more political, more belligerent, more military. But when I see that, I think of, I feel compassion for Iranians now, people in Tehran. They're not used to our life. They're not used to being bombarded. They're not used to running for shelters. They don't have 40, 50, 60, 70 years of fighting and being in mortal danger many times. And now there is mass panic in Iran. They've run out of money, and the ATMs aren't working. There's massive traffic jams trying to get out, flee out of Tehran. There's reports of no bread in bakeries and limited access to food. And you can see in general a population that isn't used to the horrible situation that they find themselves in, and of course we find ourselves in. The difference being, we as in Israel, have invested tremendous resources in preparing ourselves and having at least a good envelope of security, air defenses, radars, and bunkers, even though the story told the story of those who don't. And we've invested resources in it. They haven't. And of course, we've been unfortunately subjected to a lot of terrorism, by the way, from organizations that have been funded by Iran. So there's different perspectives here, but there's human beings on both sides of the story, feeling the pain, dealing with it, coping with it. One thing that we do, I think, exceedingly well in Israel is to adjust, adapt, and evolve and deal with situations, even tremendous hardship. And I think credit to Israelis and credit to you guys for doing such a story.
Very positive indeed, and important story to continue to show. Coming back here in studio, Jonathan, you have a note.
I think I would like to reflect on it. I mean, if we connect the dots here between how Canada has unraveled since October 7 and what Canadian Jews have faced at home in Toronto, in Montreal, and in other places, it's been maybe one of the worst places in the West to be a Jew. It's competing with London and perhaps Manchester, and that's a tough
bad competition.
Bad competition. But Canadian Jews I think they feel that they've been abandoned by their government. They've been abandoned by their law enforcement agencies, and that there's, as he said very correctly in the beginning, there's no political will actually to defend Canada. Their flag, when they sing their anthem, it's about that they will defend Canada. They will stand on their guard and defend. They're doing anything but. And they're allowing Palestinians to control the streets, terror sympathizers. They're allowing Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood to collect money in Canada. And I'm not very surprised that Iranian regime officials are finding it nice, because Canada is a great and convenient place to live. And if there's no law enforcement and actual protection of the country, then by all means, why not? So it makes sense. Palestinian terrorists, other enemies of the West, and now Iranians as well.
Concerning development indeed. Meanwhile, Ariel, we are getting some new information as far as threats coming from Iran targeting some of the Israeli cities this evening. What details do you have?
Right. So the new chief of staff of Iran's armed forces, General Mousavi, issues a warning to the residents of Tel Aviv and Haifa to leave their areas to, quote, save their lives. Now, it is important to note that both of Mousavi's predecessors were eliminated since Friday, the latest one just earlier this morning. So we do see an attempt by Iran to employ psychological warfare at Israelis, kind of trying to mimic the legitimate and even beyond necessary early warnings provided to the residents of Tehran by the IDF spokesperson unit. But ultimately, General Mousavi is doing his best in his short few hours in office As I mentioned,
famous last words.
potentially, yeah.
You talk about these warnings that Israel is giving as well. And Jonathan, this brings me back to what we were talking about, the Israeli spirit that is unfortunately used to these wars, but the residents of Tehran are not. But Israel is issuing some unprecedented evacuation warnings and a heads up in Tehran. So what does this truly show about Israel's military efforts, not against the Iranian people, but against the Iranian regime?
Yeah, so I think, as Ariel stated very correctly, they were perhaps even beyond necessary. And I think the psychological warfare aspect of them was also very important. It's one thing to strike in a populated area, but what Israel is capable of doing is, as it did in the first salvo of the war, was to strike very accurately, almost surgically, where it struck. And we can see the illustration here of the different areas where the IDF has operated and the different sites that have been struck so far, which I think is a very good visualization. It gives you a good image of just how many targets have been struck. But when the IDF issues a warning and actually urges civilians to move and evacuate, that does two important things. It weakens, it instills fear, and it weakens the regime. It instills fear in the population that someone else is telling them and dictating where they should be and where they shouldn't be, and it weakens the regime because it shows that they're not in control. And I think that in this case, the balance between security and not hitting civilians, which Israel always tries to do, and instilling fear and conducting some psychological warfare, and the balance between the two, I think this one was rather heavy on psychological warfare. And I think that's important, because undermining the stability of the regime and showing the Iranian people that the regime is not in charge, it is weak, it is feeble, it is not as strong and as feared as it was in the past. That's an important achievement. As I said before, I think that there's more than one goal that Israel will pursue.
I want to come back here in studio. Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus. After hearing this latest update, a big question from many of the Israelis, many of the reporters being, when will this operation be over? When will the war goals be completed? Is there any more insight coming from the IDF spokesperson, or it's still constantly changing by the hour?
No, I think it's pretty clear. This will take time. And I think all of the questions, which are understandable and legitimate from civilians who want to go back to life and who don't like war, it's understandable that people ask, but it's, I think, a pretty clear indication. This is going to take time, and it will take time to peel away the layers that Iran, the Islamic regime, has built over the years, and the nuclear program is a big one to dismantle, and that is what Israel is doing now. And what Brigadier General Defrin kind of stipulated is, well, this is how we're enabling it. This is how we're hunting those missile launchers. They are adapting, the Iranians are adapting to what we did first. They tried different tactics. Now the Israeli Air Force saw that and is adapting and succeeding to take out the missile launchers. And what we're seeing is probably a direct result. Less missiles being fired at Israel, and all the credit to the Israeli Air Force. I'll add one more thing, that I think it's, while it is, as I said, understandable that people want it over, I think we should have historical perspective, and I would urge people to think, in the realm of 25, 30 years. The event that we are in now is of historical proportions, and this has the potential to really course correct the Middle East for the next generation to come. So a week more, 2 weeks more, or whatever it will take, I think is a fair price to pay in order to really fundamentally change the balance of power in the Middle East, and really to secure future generations of Israelis and to do a great service to the region. So all that talk about when is this going to end, I'll put that aside. We've been through rough things since October 7. I think Israelis can take a few more weeks without asking too many questions.
We're talking about changing history here, not to put that lightly at all.